Kia ora friends, welcome back to my studio. I'm Gina, and in today's video I'm going to be making Gomez and Festa's slide that they take down to the vault. And I'm going to be turning this room into this room. So let's get started. For the flooring, I'm just going to follow the same process that I have when I've created the flooring in the rest of this level. And for all of the timber flooring in this whole project, this will be the same way that I'll create it. So what I do is I score two parallel lines into a piece of mat board and just peel away that very top layer, and that gives me the definition between each of the floorboards. For the painting, this is just a mix of brown and black paint, and I'm just going to very streakily kind of put the first coat over it. I do go back and do another coat because here you can see it's slightly darker, and then just dry brush over the top. I do quite a heavy dry brush on this one just to give it some definition. For the walls, I have already cut these out and templated them up to the room itself, and then I'm just going to cover all of them with some cardstock. It's just some black cardstock. I chose to do it this way rather than painting the mat board, purely because it just warps whenever it gets a bit of moisture to it. And then I'm just using some long sort of 5mm wide coffee stir sticks and just cut those down to all different lengths just to cover up, sort of almost like a lath and plaster type of thing. And then just using a mix of different widths and different pieces to add some additional dimension and to cover up where anything has kind of joined together. For the ceiling, it's basically following exactly the same process, just covered it with some cardstock, and then I'm just using some ice block sticks to actually create the ceiling as if it's the underside of the floorboards. So that's the idea there. So one thing I realized when I get this far through is that I needed to make a gap around the edge in order, because the ceiling actually sits on top of the walls, so I needed to make a gap around the edges in order to make room for the ceiling. So I'll just make sure I've got a bit at the front and then a little bit at the back on each side as well. And here's Mr. Supervisor, until I get to that point and realize I didn't need a gap at the front. So I'm actually just going to redo this again, third time lucky, and so this time I get it right. And then I'm just going to cut some smaller pieces to length, and then this is basically what the ceiling's going to look like. And then I do want to add in some additional detail with this, and I want to add in some floor joists through to about just less than halfway, and then a beam running through. For the painting, it's going to follow a pretty simple process. This is a really dark grey. It almost looks black here, but it's actually a really dark grey. And I'm just going to actually paint all of the woodwork this colour. I kind of almost wish I had painted these before I glued them on. However, this is where we got to. And then I'm going to use a very light grey and dry brush over the top of it. And the reason why I want to do it that way is because I want to be a really faded, pale silver, almost silver wood. You know, when wood has been left out in the sun for too long, that's the colour that I'm looking for. So this is just a really heavy dry brush over the top in order to give it some dimension and some grain effect into the wood, but actually using the paint instead. Trying not to get too much in between each of the wood slats in order to give it some depth and dimension, and making sure that that black can show through underneath. It is quite bright. I do like the texture on it, but it is actually pretty bright. So what I'm actually going to do is knock that back with a wash. And I use a mix of black acrylic paint and water. So that actually helps just sort of bring it all together and just knock back that real brightness of the grey. And then just to help the whole boards pop a little bit, because I felt that they were just sort of all blending in a little bit much, I'm just going to use some pigment powder to really add some shadows and some low lights and contrast into the piece, into all of the walls. And this really does help add some dimension into what would be pretty monochromatic walls. So now we can start putting it together. So I'm just going to start by putting the floor in and then adding in the wall pieces. So one thing, as I was starting to put these together, I wasn't too sure what to do with the opening, because actually what I'm going to do is I need to create a bit of a faux door for just in there. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just going to create a little bit of a faux door. It's going to have 3 panels in it. So it's going to have 2 very long vertical panels at the top and then 1 panel at the bottom. And I'm just using mat board to create this, and it's just being created on one side. So then I'm just going to cover it with a bit of brown paint. I'm just going to do 2 coats of that, and then also give it a really light dry brush of that same grey, which actually helps pick out some of the details. One of the things I also do off camera is add in a door handle, and that's just using a bead and a toothpick just through the middle of it. And now I can glue that into place, which means that I can glue the final wall into the project. And we've got our supervisor back. Shh, don't scare him. One of the things I do is these little strips of paper which help secure the ceiling into place. It'll make more sense as we get to it. For the slide, I'm using some cardstock. I did try with some foam, but I just felt that that was too thick. So the cardstock was going to be the right thickness, because it's sort of a bit of a faux metal kind of look that I'm going to create. And then once I've got my circles cut out, I'm just using some strips of the same cardstock, just curling those a little bit, and then just using a really fine bead of glue and just gluing those to the outside of the circle. And then I also go back with just a little bit of wood glue just on the very inside edge, just to actually add in some additional glue. And so once I've got the inside and the outside together, then I can sort of start gluing the 2 pieces together. For the base, I'm going to use a piece of balsa wood, and I'm actually going to glue that into place. But before I do, I just want to push the 2 uprights into position. And actually, when I was painting the walls, I actually painted these at the same time. So this gives me something for these to actually sit into. So one thing I did want to do is just add in some additional details, but actually these have a dual purpose because it just adds in some extra structure. So to glue the 2 pieces together, I'm just adding another piece of paper underneath. So for the step, all I'm going to do is add a bit of glue to the very bottom of the spiral and glue that onto the step, and this will actually help when we pull the spiral out, because it gives me something secure for the bottom piece to stick into. I did actually cut the circle down a little bit, so it's not 2 full circles, because you can see that extra bit off to the side there. But once I put this into place, I realized that it was too stretched out. So I did actually add that additional piece in, which gives me the 2 full circles for the slide, which work perfectly. And then once I'm happy with how it all sort of spirals up, then I can start gluing the uprights to the actual slide using my little clamps to hold it into place until it's dry. So there we are, and I just want to add some additional supports into it, just with these horizontal pieces just underneath the slide where I can, and then I just want to add in a diagonal piece through the middle as if this support has sort of fallen over. Just adds a little bit more detail into the project. So then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very kind of heavy dry brush this silver. I don't want the cardboard to get too wet, otherwise it's going to warp and it's just going to destroy all of the hard work that I've put into creating the slide. So I really just want to sort of heavy dry brush the silver. So it was at that point that I realized that it just needed a bit more detail, and so I'm just using some armature wire, and it's already in a coil, which was really helpful. And then I'm just going to thread that through on the inside of the uprights, and we've got the view of our supervisor. And so once I was happy with the shape of it, I'm just going to clamp these into place, and then using a little bit of super glue, I'm just going to glue that into place and let that dry. I'm just painting up 1 strip of some leftover cardstock with just some bronze, and that is for some additional details that I'm going to add in. And then also just to secure the armature wire to the metal. I know I've got the glue there, but one thing I did want to do is just doubly make sure that it wasn't going to come apart. And I've got some very thin jewelry wire that I'm just crisscrossed around and then twisted into place, so I know that it's not going to go anywhere. And the same for these little strapping pieces. So these pieces are going to go over the wooden piece, and I'm just going to bend those into place. and then just using my little Sharpie, I'm just going to add some sort of faux nail, and that's basically what it's going to look like, and I do that on each one of the pieces of wood where it attaches to the slide. For the lights, I've just got these string of seed lights, and I'm just going to wind those around the armature wire, which actually was really helpful that I put the armature wire there, then also just down on the inside as well, so I'm pretty happy with that. I also made some signs, so I'm just using this aluminium tray that I just picked up from the dollar store, I think it was. I'm just using some alcohol just to clean off the surface of any grease. And then this is from my little printer that just prints off little photos. I printed off all these different signs, and of a gondola, of a skull and crossbones, of a no X sign, and a few rules for an amusement park, so I thought that would be quite funny. Also, one last little thing to do before I finish up is to create a box for the battery pack. I've just got these rather wide popsicle sticks. I'm just going to create the box using those, and just using some scrap pieces of the coffee stir sticks, also some of the uprights that I've used in the slide. I'm also going to use those to add some of the corners into the box, so that's all the inside of the box. And then I just want to cut out a little bit of a slot for the cord to come out, and then that's just going to sit off to the side there. And then I can start putting in the signs and the ceiling. And so this is the bit where those bits of paper come in really handy. So at the moment they're attached to the walls, and all I'm doing here is just bending it over and gluing it onto the ceiling, which actually helps give a little bit more of a gluing surface for the ceiling. So I've just painted the inside and the back of the box black, and now I'm just going to create, I've kind of watered down this brown just to kind of make it more of a stain. Then I'm just going to give that a coat over the entire box. So I've just mixed up a bit of black paint and a bit of water for a bit of a wash, and I'm going to add this to the crate as well, just to add in a little bit more dimension to the black so it's not so flat. And I'm going to do that on the lid just to kind of give it a bit of shadow, a bit of grime, a bit of dirt, you know, that sort of thing. And then also for the actual box itself. So just around the edge there, and then into where all of the grooves are. I'm just going to sort of try and leave the very middle part of those larger panels reasonably light, and that just helps give a little bit more dimension into the box. And then one last little step, of course, is to give it a bit of a dry brush with that same grey, so it's actually helping bring, or blend all the whole project together. So I specifically wanted this to be quite brown rather than the grey of the walls, so I wanted it to be a reasonably newer piece. And then one last thing before I finish off the entire project is that I have got some rust effect, so it's some duty down rust effect that I am going to try for the very first time. And I'm going to use a thin brush and just dab that around different places on the signs and on the slide, and just allow that to oxidize a little bit and to give it sort of that rust effect. So if you've come this far and you've liked the video, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more Addams Family goodness coming up. Leave a comment below, let me know what you think, and until next time, I'll see you then. Bye for now.